infamous John Night Train Goff to talk about his history with Savage Worlds, Deadlands, and what he's been writing and the update for Blood Drive, as well as Shane Hensley, the man who created it all. So welcome, guys.
Howdy.
Great.
So I told you John Goff was real. Nobody believed me. Right there he is.
Yeah, we tried to get John Goff to come down to the Colorado conventions for years. And we just had really bad winters, and the drive was going to be a little.
I think twice.
Right?
Once was a bad winter, and the other one was the very year we were moving.
That's true.
To Virginia.
But yeah, we love him, but I haven't met him face to face yet. So knowing that he exists is actually like, it's like a peer behind the curtain. There actually is.
I could well be a robot.
Almost
like
all of us.
Marvel robot thing.
That is kind of the future for all of us, just being replaced by automatons, right? Someone else will have to create stupid puns and talk about pineapples incessantly or something. So John, how did you get into role playing games? Give me the history. When did you start in the hobby?
Oh, good Lord! Making me think. Back in
the days of stone tablets.
Yeah, I want to say it was. What year is it? 43 years ago, maybe. Wow. I think The Hobbit got me into the whole fantasy thing. And I got my hands on this Lords of the Under-Earth or something, a little pocket game that was you playing dwarves, basically going through the mines of Moria. And that led into somehow discovering Dungeons and Dragons. And playing by myself in my basement until I got a friend or two in it. And then slowly we built a group in high school. Very eclectic bunch too, including like the valedictorian class president and, a couple of guys that like me that got beat up for our lunch money every week.
But, so like a D&D John Hughes movie?
Yeah, pretty much.
Nice.
And, it was just this weird collection of different personalities playing. And that's what got me started in it. And then I went to college. And it's a lot easier in college.
So what was your first exposure to Savage Worlds or even pre-Savage Worlds, the Pinnacle products?
Well, I had gotten out of the military and moved back to Virginia and was in the process of some of the guys I kept in contact with, but Shane and I had fallen out of contact. And I looked him up in the phone book because we had those back in that day, back in the late 90s. And there was a number for him. And I think I called him rather than send an email, but we talked on the phone. He's like, "Hey, I'm glad you got back in touch with me. I published this game. I want to send it to you and have you look at it." And he sent me a copy of the original Deadlands book. And we looked at it, and my wife and I both just went nuts for it, especially because he had rules for the rifle twirl.
It was the one-handed rifle spin that won John over.
Yeah. And so I was like, "Man, this is great." And he said, "Well, I'm glad you like it because I remember our games back in college. And I think you could probably do okay if you wrote us an adventure or two." But I remember at the time he said, "I've got partners, so you're going to have to work your way up just like everybody else does. And you need to do a web piece. And then if we like that, we've got these shorter things called dime novels. Maybe you can work into that before we have you do anything really big." And so I wrote a thing for the web piece, and they liked it. And I think the next one was Night Train, wasn't it? Was the next thing I wrote for you.
That sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah. I wrote Night Train, and because I said, "So I'm looking through your book, man. You don't have any vampires. How do you not have vampires?" And this was when World of Darkness was a really big thing. And he said, "Well, that we just really don't, that doesn't fit the theme, the motif, and so forth that we have going." I said, "Well, I got an idea. Let me try it." And I sent it off, and Shane liked it.
Well, I mean, that's fortuitous. So you knew Shane before, so it sounds like you guys had.
Yeah, John's skipping out on a whole lot of history here. So,
so Shane, do.
Yeah, we've known each other for like
a long time.
30
since
4 years?
Since 87.
Okay, 33.
Yeah. So one of my friends that I went to college with was this guy named Oliver, and we were playing D&D and stuff. And we got into a water gun fight with a bunch of guys in our dorm hall, and one of them called us Sons of Gully Dwarves. So we looked at each other and we thought, he plays D&D. This was back in the days when you had to send secret codes that you were a gamer. So we became buddies, and he had just picked up Steve Jackson's Man to Man, which had just become GURPS, and we played a little bit of that. But we weren't really playing campaigns or anything. There was a hobby shop in town, and somebody had posted up an index card that said, "Hey, looking for players for a D&D game." And I took it and I thought, man, I don't know. Actually, it was a page with the little pull tabs, right? And there were already several pull tabs gone. So I pulled one off. I'm like, I don't know, who are these guys going to be, right? I mean, it's going to be, hardcore bikers from hell or something. Again, secret signals. But I called John, and he said, yeah, come out and play this one game with us, and we'll see how we all get along or something. That's my vague recollection of it. And then me and John Hoppler, who wrote a bunch of stuff for us, and Oliver, we hopped on the bus and rode it out to John's house. And I think from that moment on, we were certainly enamored. I think it took John a little time to come around to some of us.
I was a mature junior, and these were childish freshmen.
That's for sure. And John had an established group of friends that these days are my friends as well. But they were a clique, and we weren't. They welcomed us, and it was great, right? But they were their own group, and it took a little time to kind of meld in. Oliver went his own way, but Hoppler and I and Goff and some of the other people became friends, for life. And a lot of the lessons I learned about real gaming, as I would refer to today, as opposed to like my early days of D&D, came from John and the incredible D&D campaign that he ran. Every week it was, okay, I've got finals, I've got all this other stuff going on, but man, I wonder what we're going to do in John's game this week, right? And that was the highlight of our lives. We couldn't wait. Every week we were going to go to the 7-Eleven and get a bunch of junk food, and then we walked to John's apartment and play D&D for 4 or 5 heavenly hours, right? And that was the start of it. And then it turned out there was a guy at that hobby shop, Addison, who wrote some stuff for Dragon, and we thought, wow, this guy wrote for Dragon. That's the biggest deal in the world, right? And then years later, when I picked up Torg and I got into freelancing, that's when I kind of learned about the industry and how it worked and created Deadlands. And John's recollection of working his way up does not fit mine at all. Mine is more like, John, I can't believe, where have you been? He's in the Army, right? Could you please do something for our new game? I'll send you a copy right now. I sent it to him. I will always remember that he said the one-handed rifle spin won him over. And I was like, oh, thank God, John's going to do something with us. And then, the rest is history. So that's my recollection.
Well, you had to sell me to Matt. I remember Matt wasn't an easy sell on Night Train either.
Who cares?
Well, I mean, have you read this? There are 30 of these things here.
So yeah, okay. So let's get into Night Train for a little bit, because I think you might be the first person to legitimately earn your epithet or sobriquet. Like some of us had to give ourselves one to make ourselves seem bigger. Which, being this fat, you don't want to make yourself seem bigger, but whatever. I'll admit I gave myself a name. But so you're like the first savage dude, like the John Night Train Goff. So Night Train is crazy ridiculous. Like the big finale is you're going to murder everybody. The players have like almost no chance of survival. That's kind of the fame that So tell us a little bit about Night Train and the actual like what goes on. And now you can spoil a little bit.
Well, when I thought about it at the time, I had an idea for what I wanted to do for the vampires, but I'm like, how would vampires exist in the West? Because you've got town, and then conceptually, everybody's image of the West is what we work with. Then you've got 10, 20, 30 miles of desert to another town. How does this vampire get along? He's going to run through the food pretty quickly. And that's where the train idea came up. And then I'm like, that just, these guys aren't the type of guys that are going to come up with the whole, let's get a train and get somebody to run it for us. They're more feral. So then how does that work? And it just kind of built from there. And I sometimes get in the trap of trying to make things make sense to me in my head. And that actually paid off, I think, in Night Train, in that apparently it struck a chord with some people. So.
Oh, it's a whole train full of trouble. Like it starts off horrific. And I played in it once and I survived. It might have been cheating though.
Did you run away?
Well, no. So I haven't read the adventures in specific, so I don't know how much the Game Master changed. But I tried to be my metagamer self, and not in the bad metagamer sense, but we hear about the train, we did the investigation, we find the dead bodies, we're going through the West, and it's horrific what you find, right? And so we find the town, and we know the train's coming into this town. So I'm like, well, why, if these people are precious, why don't have the fight here, have the fight somewhere else? Let's try to preempt the train getting to the town. So let's go derail it. So that was we're going to avoid the whole conflict, right? Like same thing, like I played in a D&D game where we're going down a mine. I'm like, why do we have to fight all these monsters? Why don't we just divert the river and flood the mine, kill them all, undivert the river, let the thing drain out over time, and we'll go collect all the gold for free, right? That's my little let's be smart, not work hard. Even in RPGs, when actually doing stuff costs you nothing, like you can say, I just ran for 4 miles. Yeah, great. Right. But still, it's the lizard brain. So that didn't work. We tried to derail it. It's still coming to town. It crashes into town, flips in the town, but it opens up all the cars. And literally, there's a party of 5 of us. We are all legendary. Only time I've really played a legendary character. And I think that's probably why I might have survived, because it wasn't really supposed to be legendary. But literally train cars full of vampires and automatons. And I was playing a blessed who had kind of a blessed hickory stick that was kind of a, if you got the Joker and then an ace, it was like a one-shot, one kind of kill kind of weapon. So instead of looking at the field of things that are going to kill me, and it was literally in 2 rounds, most of our party was incapacitated. It was that, we were not prepared. I booked it for the conductor and got the one lucky roll to hit him with the right stick. And so that was the only reason we survived, or I survived, was I let's not fight that. Let's just go for the one, metagame. So I'm not sure if the Game Master named an automaton who gives out Bibles in his other game, Landauer, because of that. But Donnie Arnold was one who ran that game. So,
okay.
So I don't know what he changed. I don't know if it was but a party of 5 and literally cars full of things that can kill you in one round.
Donnie's run it far more times than even I have. So, the funny thing was, when I wrote it, and my group that I was running the game for at the same time didn't know. They never saw the adventure or anything, but they stumbled into a town full of vampires. And so there were a couple of running jokes that developed. One, Huckster became convinced that barbed wire kept vampires away, though he wrapped his hat in barbed wire for the rest of the campaign. And the other one was when they found they'd been drinking out of the well where some of the vampires had sheltered during the day. And you drank corpse water became a thing. But anytime they would hear the whistle, they would just run. They said, well, something bad happens when the train comes down. We found vampires in one of these towns. No. They just left, and I never could get them in a town.
Which is funny because, you talk about railroading, the train is on a track. It's
literally the adventure.
Your party's still like, nope, we're not going to engage in the GM's narrative. No, we're better than that. Yeah.
So those are back in the heady days when you could be harrowed and not know it.
That'd be fun.
Original Deadlands. And one of our characters started off harrowed and didn't know it. And we played for months before he finally just found out is the thing took control to kill another player character trapped in a cell. And
I love this.
it was a lot of fun back then.
Oh my God, that's amazing. And so that, I mean, the adventure took on a life of its own. I met people at the very first Gen Con I went to who had the badge. I survived Night Train that you must have given out, what, a decade or more?
Somebody else came up with that.
Oh, someone else did, okay. But I mean, that's a thing now. There are literally people repping their geek reputation on their con badge that they survived your adventure for Savage Worlds.
And the funny thing is, you talk about I've got a sober cat that I earned. How many years did I fight that, Shane?
Every single time.
And I finally
I've written other stuff.
Got Hucksters and Hexes, River of Blood, The Black Circle.
Yeah.
Come on. And
branding, man, branding. Disney doesn't give up the mouse.
And finally, I was just like, hey, you know what? This is how those one-hit wonder bands feel. At least I have one hit.
Right? Well, you got a lot of hits, but that's certainly the one that people know. And it also just has, it's got a good name. Night Train. Oh, what is that? It instantly rings true that it's something terrible.
Well, and it matches. So if you think about it, okay, so apparently I've gotten into John's brain. He uses a horror term and then a term of conveyance. So night, terrific. Train, conveyance. Blood, terrific. Drives a form of conveyance. So I've solved your naming scheme. We can put these on dice. We'll have one dice, which is a horror term, one dice, which is a conveyance term, and Walking Dead. They just reversed it. Dead walking, right? See, like very cool. So, anyways, tell us about Blood Drive. The you're not a one-hit wonder because apparently Shane's decided to republish one of your adventures, and it's now hugely successful on Kickstarter again.
Yeah, I'm still floored by that. But Blood Drive started out about the time Shane got me into Deadlands originally. There was a miniseries on TV on a Larry McMurtry book, Lonesome Dove. If you've not seen it, please watch it. It is amazing. It has Tommy Lee Jones and Robert Duvall as the protagonists,
and they're young.
Ish.
Younger, but I mean they're both gray and white haired
they were born wrinkled.
Yeah.
Tommy Lee Jones is a lich.
And in it they play two retired Texas Rangers that decide they're going to have one last adventure and make this grand cattle drive. It's a romanticization of the good night loving story. And it really hooked me. And for good grief, when did we first publish this? Was it like
2012?
2012. It took me 15 years, but eventually I said, I want to write my own little take on it, my homage, if you will. And I pitched it to Matthew Cutter, who was the brand manager. And he was like, yeah, run with it. So I did it in 3 pieces. So you could play any part of it that you wanted. But if you played the whole thing, it could be kind of a mini campaign, or how much effort the GM wants to put into it, a full size campaign. And there you go.
So I think one thing that kind of came from that is like authenticity. Like it's kind of ties into the last stream we did where Shane and Simon and I talked about our own Wyoming experiences, or my Wyoming and their Western experiences on the cattle drive. That bringing some of the real cowboy stuff, the real West, into gaming.
Yeah. This one thing I think that. Sorry. One thing that got Cutter on it is at that time he was working on Last Sons, and there's a smaller cattle drive adventure in there. But I said, we haven't really done up the cowboy aspect to Deadlands, which we've not gone into the day-to-day life of the cowboy. And he was like, yeah, he said, I think there's definitely room to explore there. And spent a lot of time on that.
Yeah, it's kind of where it starts off, right? I mean, you guys have some the rope and riding and some mechanics too that kind of speak to the Western experience. We're going to talk about those. It'd be great.
Well, Shane has brought them up to date with the new stuff, and he's actually got the hands-on experience with it. So
let me share my screen, and we'll give people a little teaser into not only Blood Drive, but kind of how we work.
It's a hanging fence.
So this is the same title page from the original Deadlands. So we put that warning on there because after the Kickstarter, we'll send it out in PDF form, and if people find any errors that our proofers missed, we'll get those fixed before we send it to print, right? So that's why we do that. So we took the original 3 adventures that John wrote, and here they are. And they're all in this one new hardback book, right? And this was kind of something I wanted to do from the day John started turning these in. I knew it was going to be something big and cool and iconic for Deadlands, but it took a while to get to it. So production-wise, we start with, we have full pagers in a lot of the new Deadlands format, which, we don't have this yet. So this is how our art orders get started. I'll put an idea here, and then we'll collect all those into a document for Aaron Acevedo, who's our art director. So that will be a big full-page picture there of the Blood Drive. And then one of the important things, during the Deadlands Kickstarter, we got asked by a lot of people to do normal cowboys and Indian and cowgirls. So we did some of that, and in the adventure, you can play a fairly normal group of ranch hands, or you can play, your typical mad scientist, huckster, gunslinger kind of party. Then we sum up the adventure, and this is where you get started. So you get hired by this guy, Bill Sutter, and that's his niece, Abby, that goes with you. And things start pretty normal. You've got ranch life, you've got some chores that you have to do, and these are just little narratives that you can describe, how your character is going to clear out a rattlesnake den that threatens the herd. And the GM might decide to make that one, for example, a quick encounter, whereas something like, can or dry food, you just tell maybe a story about spending the day with Abby canning food or something, right? So it's a little chance for role playing and narrative, and it's kind of the calm before the storm, right? Because, that storms are coming. Then the roping and riding, we took the original stuff that John wrote, kind of boiled it down into some of the new stuff we do, like the quick encounters. And one of the cool things, I think, is you can actually roll special traits for your horse. You actually have a remuda of horses, a string of horses. So each one might have something kind of special. So you might use your strong horse if you think you're going to go out and have to fight something. You might want your fast horse if you're going to have to outrun something or chase something down. So I'm not going to spoil too much of the adventure here, but this is just a very quick peek. This is before we put the borders and stuff on the art and kind of finalize that stuff. One of the cool things in this one is we'll have a little better map for you to show where you're at. So that's our Deadlands the Weird West map behind there that we'll use that as the base. And then this is, I took this from the internet, so we don't own this. This shows the original Good Night Loving Trail, and we'll get 3 or 4 more examples to make sure, where it runs. But we're going to put that on our map so the game master has a little better idea of exactly where this takes place. And John, in the original, he wrote, like you're going to go through the Trincheras Pass. You're going to go through what will eventually become Tucumcari, New Mexico, those kinds of places. So what's really cool that I do a lot in my games, I'll use Google Earth and I'll go walk the landscape, right? So that I can better describe it to my players. It is, rolling scrub in all directions. And in the distance, you see the, the Taos Mountains or, whatever it is. And that really helps with the immersion.
It's pretty awesome that you do that, because when I was writing it, now I've driven across country far more than any person who's not a long haul trucker should have. And I've been through these areas multiple times, but I used Google Earth as I was writing it to kind of get when it says this is a pass, what does it look like?
Right.
So it's kind of neat that you're actually going back and doing the same thing as you're running.
I do that with everything now. So in Necessary Evil Breakout, for example, you're on a particular block in New York, and I've walked all around that thing in Google Earth now. I know all the different stores and what businesses are located in the apartments overhead and so forth. It's pretty neat, what you can do these days. It's also actually a bit of a challenge, right? Because John and I, in the early days of Deadlands, we lived in Virginia. and neither of us had been. John, had you been west before?
Oh yeah.
Okay, I hadn't.
Yeah,
so we're just looking at books and making stuff up, right? The towns we made up never existed for the most part, unless it's like Tombstone or something. Like Perdition was made up. A lot of biblical names we just created, which we still do and will do, because a lot of those towns did kind of come and go, and it's also a fantasy, right? But it's really cool now that you can go visit these places and find authentic stuff that people who live there may know and have cool stories to share with you. Anyway, the other night in the cattle drive video, I was talking about the different positions in a cattle drive. And I got to say, this one picture is why I did the cattle drive 2 years ago. John had this ordered, and just kind of realizing, there's more to it than you're just riding beside a bunch of cows all day. There's a methodology to it. There's how you get across streams in modern times, how you get across highways, who opens the gates, who closes the gates, the importance of the chuck wagon, who takes care of the remuda, all this stuff, right? So we don't bog you down in that kind of detail in the game, of course, because this is about, cool Deadlands horrific action. But there's a good taste of it in here, and you'll get that along the drive. Again, without spoiling, I'll hop to one other thing. So this is one of the old maps we did. We're redoing these maps to kind of reach our newer look. And I think, people who played it before, that's going to be really useful. It's hard to tell, for example, that where these guards are, is this picture, right? So we're going to make that match a little better, and it'll be a little more immersive for you. And then we'll talk about, the same kind of stuff. And I'm going to stop there so I don't give away any further spoilers.
Well, and the authenticity is actually, it's amazing. Like when we were on the Savage Cruise, it was this year technically. It feels like a lifetime ago. But when we were in New Orleans, geez.
Or Nolans.
NOLA. So we were in NOLA. Shane organized an amazing night tour around, a walking tour, ghost tour around the quarters, and so I was next to Jody, and we were literally talking about, like, we need to write an adventure about that building. Oh, this is a great. The ideas just flow when you are in these places. And I was with Shane in this bar that was, clearly a fire hazard. There, if there's, the pathway in was less narrow than my shoulders. I had to walk sideways, and there were like 3 stories to it. Once you were inside, it was all poorly lit. There was bars of alcohol at each stop, and we finally got out of there. And we're like, yeah, that's a death trap. That is not modern building codes. But
so John is familiar with this because I took us on that ghost tour, because I went with John and his buddy, another guy named John, to the Sugar Bowl in, what year was that, John?
2000.
Maybe that sounds right. And we did a ghost tour then and did the LaLaurie house and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And my greatest regret from that trip is I only had, an old flip phone at the time, but John was standing underneath this street light in front of the LaLaurie house. And it was just one of those, I can see it in my head. It was one of those magical author's photos moments, right? And I got my little flip phone and I took the picture. And, it was a fine little 320 pixel picture or whatever, but it didn't come out very well in hindsight. But if I'd had a modern phone, that would be John's author's cover jacket for eternity. It was awesome.
Yeah, if I remember, there was even a light on up in the LaLaurie house.
Oddly enough, that might have actually been Nick Cage. Did you know that he owned the LaLaurie movie?
I did, yes. But the funny thing about that tour was we were eating it up. It was great. And then they go, and we're going to end up in one of the most haunted places in New Orleans. And they took us into the hotel we were staying in. Like, what?
Which had been an orphanage.
Yeah.
Oh, and a bunch of kids had died there. It was horrible. Yeah. So, as a quick aside, I recommend anybody who's watching this, anybody who plays and likes our stuff, do the ghost tour any place you go. I've now done them in Dublin, Ireland. I've done them in England. I've done them all over the world now. Any place I can get them. And I actually don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe in the supernatural at all. But I love the stories. I love the history that you get with it. And they're really good insights into people's lives at the time. just fantastic and more interesting than dry history sometimes, right?
And do them in the city you live in.
Oh yeah.
People never go to the monuments and the things near where they live, right? It's a great way to learn your city and learn some history. And Denver's got some cool ones because
I'd love to do Denver. Yeah.
They're fun. But I mean, and one more little anecdote. When Fox and I, kind of a year and some ago, we did a college lecture up in the Dakotas for gaming. And on the drive up, we went through Wyoming. And so we did Devil's Tower. And the I hadn't run nearly as much as Fox. Fox has run all of the Deadlands multiple times, multiple groups. But apparently there's is it Last Sons, where there's Devil Tower and there's a certain monster that is populating one of the areas around Devil's Tower. There's a secret entrance to get in what is inside Devil's Tower in the game. Whoever wrote that, we were standing there, and there's all the geography was accurate, and there's like a prairie dog field. It's a famous prairie dog field that has been updated a little bit for the horror elements of Deadlands, and we were just nerding it because Fox is like, I ran a game here. This is the map from the book. It's literally right there. That's where my party died, and they, and that, I don't know. I mean, to me, that's the best part about alt history or historical fiction. History is bizarre and fantastic and weird, and there's just so much there that you can build on. So when you take it into the fantasy realm, you can literally do the tour. We can do the Deadlands tour and visit places that are in these adventures. Given that Colorado is on the map on the Goodnight Loving Drive, we could make some arrangements, guys. We could do this. We could have a little, gaming and roping. So tell us a few little details, John or Shane, after you do the cowboy stuff. After how does it ramp up into the horror or the Deadlands or the strangeness? What's the initial kind of signal that if you're playing the regular cowpoke that something might not be right?
You build an enemy early on that sticks with you a very long time, and as things go, your enemy grows as well. I don't want to say anything else, but I was going to say one of the things, and I don't know how much of this makes it the transition to Deadlands post Morgana. One of the things that I tried to incorporate, because I noticed on the trail that they were going to encounter pretty much every one of the rail barons, or they were going to cross the line in some way. And I tried to have some encounter around each of the rail barons along that. And some of those step pretty firmly into the weird areas. And it kind of, I would say it slowly builds as you go along. You'll see a little weird here, a little bit of horror here, and a lot of it just kind of follows you and gets bigger as you go.
There's some plausible deniability to some of the things you meet earlier on that, the game master could come right out and say, it's a zombie, right? Or it might be a mysterious figure who shoots at you from the darkness, right? So that level of stuff, that's not actually what it is, but that kind of thing. And then there might be an automaton in your future. Those are accepted in the Weird West. They're clockwork men, right? That's all they are. As John said, there's going to come a point where it's like, yeah, that's not natural.
There will come a reckoning. Yes, yes.
Yes, sir.
Because of the way that it was originally written, I think there are, each chapter kind of has a ramp up and then a climax at the end. And hopefully the end of the third one tops the other two. So for your party, it all depends on what your party does and how your game master runs it.
Yeah, you have a lot of agency in this one. You're hired at first as a hand, but as you prove yourself, you take a leadership position. And as situations arise, you're more competent than the guy who hired you, right? By necessity of the game system, if nothing else. And he says, well, why don't you handle this? And do.
So I think we might have gotten to the point where we don't want to spoil any more about what's actually in the Blood Drive Adventure. But you guys, so Mr. Not actually a one-hit wonder Goff over here, what are you working on now?
Do that. John, not actually a one-hit wonder Goff.
Yeah, we're gonna need a wider screen for these sober kits. They're like my waistline in lockdown. It's just getting wider. So what are you working on now? What is the PEG project? Shane is announced some stuff, but what's your current task? What's on the desk?
Up to my neck in Deadlands Dark Ages. We mentioned the Morgana effect briefly in passing, but it's something that, honestly, for as long as I've been associated with Deadlands, somebody has been asking for, do a Deadlands Dark Ages or do a Deadlands fantasy in Europe and all of this. And the time was finally right for it. It fits into the storyline and lets us do what we want to do. And it's one that we've been working on for quite a while because it ties into so much stuff. And we want to make sure that it's in line with Suede, it's in line with Deadlands, and it's in line with a certain unnamed partner, companion product that is not too far in the distant future, I don't believe. So right now, I think we're at the polishing stage. I'm actually running my second group through the plot point. It is, it's 90% in the tank now.
Much to Shane's chagrin, because we did not plan this early, and he hates when I pull out secrets. But usually we're at late night at a con or on a cruise, and there's been the drink pass has already gone out. But as a tiny spoiler, and obviously subject to all the disclaimers that everything might change between now and it's published, because you've run a second group through the plot point. What's the initial scene or the initial thing on the plot point?
Let me think back, because it changed between the two running. Let me just go over here and open that document up. Let's see.
Before, when Shane was showing his screen on the in development document, people have responded to kind of the behind the scenes stuff on these streams. Fox and I and some of the other people were on the con crew. A year or 2 years ago when Suede was coming out, kind of got our first look at it on seeing kind of Pinnacle's process on the alpha drafts for Suede, and how at some point Shane literally puts it into the actual graphical document layout and things aren't, there's placeholders and stuff like that. And just seeing how that evolved was kind of really fascinating on the process. So I'm sure people will appreciate kind of seeing a little bit on the how do you write an RPG? What is the process like? How does playtesting work and that stuff? So do feel free to chime in on that, because I think people do respond well to figuring out how this industry even works. Because a lot of us are reluctant game writers. It's it's a passion and we kind of fell into it versus. No one in middle school had their guidance counselor say, "Hey, doctor, lawyer, RPG writer, look into it. Here's the classes you can take." Right? So
maybe they do now.
They should. They shouldn't.
I don't want competition. There's enough already.
Where I have started it both times, both plot points I've begun with this adventure. It's no longer part of the plot point itself because, we'll leave it at that. But you are, your group basically is in, gotta look it up. Make sure I don't say anything incorrect here. You've been hired isn't really the correct word, but requested by a powerful thane of the wheat fields, which is a place in, I believe it's Cornwall, Devon, in Wessex, to investigate a small village within his area that he's held responsible for, by the name of Salton, where they have been curiously left alone by the Danish raiders that at this point are plaguing the entirety of Wessex. They for some reason, they've not had the problems that everyone else has had. And because he suspects duplicity, he doesn't trust anyone within even his own household. And he asks these strangers to go find out what's going on. And that's where I have begun it both times, because I don't think you have to begin the plot points with the first adventure in the plot point necessarily. And I think that's one of the strengths of the plot points, is that you can plug in the parts where they fit within the story that you want to tell.
Bridging this to kind of what we talked about with Blood Drive and with Deadlands. So the just a little hint, maybe, if you guys can share. Who are you in Dark Ages? Like the characters, like are you normal people? Are you peasants? And or is there the range? Is it the same thing? Like, you can start as the cowhand, but you might end up being a weirdness yourself. You might be undead even. Who are you in this kind of this world?
There's the exact same range that there is in Deadlands that you can play. Like, for instance, sample characters. I'll just read you some of it: an alchemist, common folk, a merchant, a priest, a Dane raider, a rune mage, a scholar, a saint, a scop, a traveler, wolf's head, or a woodsman, any of those things.
Why don't you tell them a little bit about Paladins, John? I mean, remember, this stuff has already been released with Sins of the Father that we did for the Suede release. So some of that stuff is out there. But want to tell them a little bit about Paladins? I think that's the
read the introductory text here from the sample characters. Called to serve by a vision of the legendary wizard Merlin, Paladins roam the countryside fighting the true threat to Britain. Armed with their strange peacemakers, these worthy souls stand against creatures that have crawled from the nightmares of hell itself. And the concept for the Paladin is actually Shane's, because he had, much like, I think, the trigger for Deadlands, Shane, was a visual image. He had a picture that he described to me of the crypts where you have the graven image on top of the stone sarcophagus. But the image he had was of a knight, but rather than holding a sword, holding crossed peacemakers, and just graven in stone. And he said, that is the image that I want to make work.
Oh, I mean, it kind of brings to mind, I mean, if you think about it, like knights, cowboys, samurai, you have these like men and women, horses, iconic weapons, and then just these very evocative scenes that you put these people in, the environment. So, I mean, they're just very strong narrative parallels between kind of the stories you can tell in the Wild West and kind of in like Europe. But then again, there's that difference. Like you mentioned the Thane, whereas like in the West, you don't have a lot of government control. A lot of it is literally wild because there isn't top heavy authority. Whereas in feudal Europe, you have the exact opposite part of the pyramid. You have so much top heavy authority. That, and then you kind of get the samurai flicks, which are like the weird mix of those, right? You've got huge top heavy authority, but they're trying to evoke the freedom of the cowboys. So you get the Ronin, and so it's just amazing how you kind of how it will definitely be different than Deadlands, but you can really touch on all those fun things to play, those narratives on like, what is my character? How can I be heroic? How can I be a good person in this challenging environment? So I am really excited for the new Dark Ages to come out. I mean, I want to play it, I want to write for it, whatever. I mean, it's just like there's so much to do there that just sounds, it fits so well. It's like I agree with you. Like it's obvious, but there's also something about it that's like, yeah, it's time now. There is a certain kind of coolness to it.
The parallels that you touched on there, as I was doing research for it, just actually floored me. How many things from that era carry forward into the West. I mean, you've got the obvious, the separated settlements, the frontier aspects. You've got the warring factions. You've got the kind of flip the spin on cowboys and Native Americans. You've now got Danes and Saxons, but things just as simple as what law there was enforced by, in many cases, the Shire Reeve, who became compressed to the sheriff. And There was another thing that hit me while you were talking that has now escaped me. But even the term paladin, you remember there was a famous black and white TV show.
Paladin, Paladin.
Travel. I think that those are meshed very deeply in our Western culture. We just don't even realize how far back some of these concepts go. So.
Well, right, and even just tying it into horror. I mean, that certain Stephen King movie with they were singing the Paladin song when they're going on train tracks to go view a dead body, right?
Oh yeah,
right. I mean,
exactly.
These themes really do speak to kind of some either lived experience or desired experience for people, and I think that's kind of what the best part of role playing is that it is connected to reality, but it's also fantasy. There's escapism and touchstones with reality, and I think that's kind of what that's kind of the theme of. I mean, it wasn't intentional. It was kind of the theme of the discussion today about bringing some authentic history into the role-playing genre, using real history as inspiration, but giving yourself the freedom to do fantastical things as well.
That's one of the reasons I'm so excited about Dark Ages, and what I've seen so far of Goff's manuscript is. I call him Goff, by the way, because we have a lot of Johns in our group.
Yeah.
I watch, the Vikings TV show in The Last Kingdom on Netflix. And, that's right in this same time period.
Exactly.
And, you throw in a little sprinkling of, you could call it Deadlands. You mentioned Stephen King. You could call it Dark Tower. That's probably a whole other discussion. I actually had not read Dark Tower when any of this came about, but I do like it. I think, there's the idea of I think Roland is a paladin in that. I think they call him. Maybe they don't. I don't remember. He is one, right? Yeah. He's a champion like that. But mixing, the Lovecraftian horror of the Dark Ages with the historical setting of the Danish invasion of England and the factionalized wars that were going on. It's just ripe for conflict and tension and all these horrible things that happen in between. And that's why, you can make a party of a Saxon and a Dane and a Moor or whatever, right? As they roam around trying to fight the real evil. And, the grognards and the history buffs like us can get that cool, yeah, I'm right there. I'm working for Alfred the Great, right? And still go fight Dagon coming out of the sea, right? That kind of thing. And that's a hell of a mix.
One of the really cool things is we were tying it to Deadlands, looking at how the time that we selected, which conveniently matches with specific times in the Deadlands universe, how much stuff was going on right there in that 2 or 3 year period. Was able to, one of the plot point pieces involves you in a major event, a major historical event, that when I saw how everything lined up, I was just like, oh wow, this is it's almost like it was. Makes me wonder if we're in the Matrix, because some of the stuff just lined up too well.
I think years ago I pitched a certain idea to Shane about a thread that could connect most of the Deadlands properties, and I'll probably pull it out for a different project. But the historical thread is kind of one of those things where, like, too many coincidences, right? And the interesting thing is, like, in Weird Wars Rome, that is also very much a period of lots of war and conflict, lots of multiple cultures really going through different iconic parts of their history. Egypt is going through the fall of the Hellenic, regime, and then Rome is literally at that tipping point between, the old guard, where we literally had, democracy, and we are about to go into, centuries of dictatorship and emperors, and just all the, it's the same milieu. I mean, I think some people criticize historical conflict, but we are in the storytelling business, if you think about it, and there aren't good stories without conflict. If everybody gets what they want and is happy in the first scene, there's nowhere to go, right? There's no meat to chew on that. There's no goals. So, I mean, I know we're getting some sensitivities, but it's like that is, we get to play with those ideas. I mean, we're not ignoring them. That's what makes the narrative. That is what, the
that was actually that was actually the theme of Evernight. The very first thing we ever made for Deadland or for Savage Worlds was in a time where everything's peaceful. I mean, literally in the game it says the sewers are tinged with roses, so the sewers smell like roses, right? And people became soft. So when this horrible thing happens, they don't know how to fight back, right? And that's what you have to relearn how to do. And I think, to kind of bring this back around to Blood Drive and Westerns, the reason I think Westerns have such appeal is it's that whole personal accountability and personal, there's nobody to rely on but yourself and maybe, the guys right around you, guys and gals. That's something we're losing touch with, I think, most of us, not everybody. If I want to know how to fix my toilet, I'm going to look on YouTube, and there will be 1,000 videos on it and probably 50 videos of my specific toilet. It's amazing. But our forefathers, our pioneers, throughout history, but especially in the Western period, they had to figure all this out on their own, and you make do with what you had. And I think that has a lot of appeal from a gaming point of view, right? Because you can't just go call the police because something popped up out of the graveyard. You might be the police, you might be the sheriff or the marshal, but you got to deal with it yourself, especially if you're on an isolated ranch 10 miles from town. And those are good scenarios for gaming.
Those threads are kind of there are Star Trek is very much submarine warfare. If you look at those kind of, you are people who have a very hostile environment 3 feet to your right outside that bulkhead. And it's just you and your crew. And then there's things out there that want to kill you in their little form of conveyance. And so you look at submarine warfare in kind of the Korean War, and you look at where it was Star Trek, very similar, right? And Star Wars is very much the Western in space. Those things. If you don't have exploration, if you don't have chaos, the stories will fall a little flat. And I think that's kind of the magic of Deadlands is that it's historical, but you throw in the extra axis of freedom with weirdness and magic and being able to do the alt part of the alt history or the fiction part of historical fiction, and it's great. So I mean, I know you guys were surprised about how well the Blood Drive Kickstarter took off. I think the response was more than anybody on this side.
We're thrilled.
And but I think it speaks to that. I think people want these stories. They're well done, obviously, and they've lasted the test of time. So, any final thoughts, guys? Any final thoughts on Blood Drive, on projects coming up, on Westerns? Last words.
I'll go first, so John can close. Mine are always sappy, right? So, John was my real first game master, dungeon master back in the day, and he instilled a certain way of gaming that has lasted me and John Hopler and so many others in our group for 30 plus years now. So, for me, making stuff that John has written and bringing it into the modern era and, getting people like Carl Kiesler and our new artists and graphic designers to make it pretty, it's kind of an honor for me. I'm carrying on the legacy of the guy who got me started. So, every time I work on a John Goff product, that's how I think about it.
Wow. Now I'm intensely uncomfortable.
This is also how our relationship works.
I honestly just remember how much I owe to Shane for giving me the opportunity to play in his sandbox for over 2 decades now. It's been a blast. He said something yesterday, I think it was, he shared a Neil Gaiman quote, and it's kind of, people talk about how tough Night Train is or what, and I tend to have a reputation for making difficult adventures. But I think the reason that I do is when it's all said and done, I want you to walk away from it with that feeling of accomplishment that you can't get anywhere else, that you did this, you beat this. And the Neil Gaiman quote was, let me look at it so I don't misquote it, because it was just great. Fairy tales are more than true, not because they tell us that dragons exist, but because they tell us that dragons can be beaten. And that's hopefully what people take away from games more than anything, is that you can beat the dragons.
That's a fantastic point to stop. I don't think it could be said better. So thank you guys for the interview. John, we'll have to get you out. Maybe we can get you to Deadwood next fall, 2021.
I actually was planning on coming this time.
Oh, fantastic. I will get to meet you in person.
Something came up that just kind of, I can't remember what was on my calendar that preempted it, but
that too is a dragon we will overcome, guys. So a perfect segue. So yeah, guys, we appreciate you joining us. Thanks for the inspiration and for the great content in the games. We appreciate you guys.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, John.
And thanks everybody that buys the stuff and lets us do it.
That's the important part. Thanks to the fans who make all of it possible.